Hello and welcome to Labyrinth, the Life of Her Mind, a podcast devoted to how women think about their professions, careers, research, and life. My name is Mia Wood, and my guest today is Dr. Veena Joy, U.S. lead for strategic partnerships in allergy and autoimmunity at Thermo Fisher Scientific. Dr. Joy's work is focused on improving the diagnostic process for autoimmune patients, especially women who are at considerably more risk than men to develop autoimmune diseases. Welcome, Dr. Joy, and thank you for taking time to chat.
Thank you, Mia. It's such a pleasure to be here. I appreciate you inviting me and looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you. Well, let's get started.
Absolutely.
So your educational path is intriguing. Undergraduate study in the biological basis of behavior, PhD in population health, and master's in cell and molecular biology. How did you come to study science and then specialize in autoimmune diseases?
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting path that I've taken. I grew up loving science. My mom has a PhD in molecular biology herself, and so really kind of went down that track.
Mhm.
And when I was in undergrad, made the decision that I wanted to move a little bit more into the molecular biology side, so more pure science.
Mhm.
Went and did my master's, and then had the opportunity to transition when I was making the decision between do I want to go to, pursue a further degree or get my PhD in molecular biology. I had an opportunity open up to move into the industry side. And that's, not really a step I ever thought I would take growing up.
Mhm.
So moved into the industry side, really was exposed to directly within Thermo Fisher, kind of all the different vantage points and kind of seeing, outside of academia, what science could look like,
Mhm.
which was especially intriguing for me. And in that space, I actually had an opportunity to move from where I initially started into most of my work kind of in the basic sciences side. So really working with, yeast and mice and really looking at genetic mechanisms. I had the opportunity within Thermo to be a little bit more exposed to the impact of what you do kind of in the basic science space
Mhm.
over to translational medicine and then directly into clinical medicine. And it was at that point that I really took a step back and really became more curious around what's the connection, what can I learn, and how do I apply some of the conversations I'm having, and how can I take my skill set and apply that a little bit further. So that really opened up my mind to health economics, and really understanding what is the value of what we do, what is the impact of what we do. It's interesting. My dad is a quality engineer, so I grew up always kind of with him speaking the kind of the quality language. So it's funny to me now, many years later, that has really translated into the kind of my background now in population health and health economics. So it's been very exciting. I attribute a lot of what Thermo has provided to be able to open my eyes to that, and then now me being able to mentor other scientists or other young scientists, that are stepping out into the world and trying to navigate what they can do with the really amazing skill set that they have. So really being able to take it those different pathways has been fun, intriguing, exciting. But that's really how it came about.
So, do you mind if I jump ahead a little bit based on a couple of points that you've just made? One is how you what that experience was of the industry space or the private, if you will, private research space versus public or university research, academic research. And then um, what would you say to somebody you're mentoring or who's interested in working on scientific issues about the two different experiences because you've had both?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. Both are great. So I'll start off by saying that I think both offer such unique advantages. And it really depends where your passion lies. So I think first, anyone should think about what they want to do, how they want to impact, and the impact that they have on society. So first thinking through that. But in the academic space, especially, within basic science or even translational medicine, et cetera, you tend to be much more focused on your area of interest. And so you become, very hyper focused there and really collaborate kind of in that space. What excited me and what I learned when I stepped out of academia and really into the industry space, private research type space, was the opportunity for my myopic view of very specific subjects to expand out. And what I have learned about myself through that, right? Like that I truly enjoy connecting dots. I truly enjoy looking at the bigger picture and thinking how different pieces funnel together and connect. And that has been exciting. So I think, for anyone that my mentor, one of the first things I say, both for whether they're scientists or not, don't just think narrowly, think outside of the box, because even if you don't want to go in those arenas, you can understand how these other types of careers or pathways might influence what you ultimately decide to do. And then specifically for scientists, the biggest piece of advice I give them is same thing, think outside of the box, and always remember that your experience as a scientist and kind of the credibility that you bring as a scientist is able to impact so many different fields, not just academia, and not just research, right? Like being able to have a clinical impact, being able to tie that to patient care, being able to think about that from a marketing standpoint or even a commercial standpoint. So, and really that's how Thermo Fisher has opened my eyes, is being able to come from a space where it was purely research into a space where how can that research be applied every day, and how can we make more of an impact? So that's what's I think been so exciting to be part of Thermo Fisher, especially as Thermo Fisher has also evolved into taking on being more in the realm of clinical and clinical diagnostics and pharmaceuticals, et cetera.
So part of a couple of parts of your answer make me think that there's already this a foundation for my next question about how you moved into autoimmune diagnostics, particularly as from what I can gather, there's so much we don't know about autoimmune diseases, and then your point in particular about, connecting dots and thinking outside the box with respect to the fact that it's often hard to diagnose autoimmune diseases, et cetera, et cetera. So, but rather than answer the question for you, let me ask you, how did you move into the autoimmune diagnostics space?
Yeah, I started out in cancer research. So a lot of my work was initially around cancer research. When I moved into Thermo, like I said, I initially started more in the basic and translational science side. So less clinical, more kind of on the very wet lab type of work. And being able to support discussions in that realm. And then when I moved back into the clinical space, that was in cancer diagnostics, so next generation sequencing. And that's around the time I was also, completing my PhD and moving more into the population health economics type of space. What I learned then was that everybody at that point in time, pharmacoeconomics, everything around the value of the pharmaceutical and how we can impact how therapies are managed, was really tied to that cancer diagnostic and next generation sequencing. So most people were exploring in that realm because health economics is a relatively new field and continues to evolve. And I also, knew the autoimmune space within Thermo Fisher and had some exposure to that. And the more I dug into it, the more I realized, gosh, these therapeutics are just as costly. So if there is a way to mitigate and manage how patients get the therapy, or how if and when patients are getting the right diagnosis to then get the right therapeutic, are they getting the right diagnosis early so the therapeutic can be effective? Like those are all questions that aren't being answered for drugs that are just as, if not more costly than cancer medication. So, for me, it was, but not as many people are exploring in that space. So is this an avenue to really uncover something new and exciting? And that was the biggest reason for me to kind of step away from cancer biology and kind of the cancer diagnostic space in oncology and move into autoimmune diagnostics. Because again, I feel like, especially in the pharmacoeconomic realm, most of that has initially stemmed from the pharma world. So not as many people in the medical device and is particularly diagnostic space. So for me, it was really exciting to not only step away from the pharma space and look at diagnostics, which in my opinion, you really can't manage the patient without getting the diagnostics correct, right? And oftentimes, historically, how things have been set up is most things make the assumption that the diagnostic is correct. And what we continue to find is there's so much room for improvement there that can impact. And then effectively, that's how we can calculate value. That's how we can calculate impact. And that's really how we can impact patient lives. And I think that's always important, is the more impact we can have on a patient's journey within their diagnosis, it's all the better.
As you were talking about that part of the process, I was thinking about so two experiences. One was years and years and years ago. My doctor I was seeing for I was experiencing hives, and he said, "Well, you've got a thyroid disease, an autoimmune thyroid disease, and I'm pretty sure that the hives are related to that, but we don't have a diagnostic for it. I just think that's what's happening, so I'm going to treat you, right?" And then later on, I guess they did get such a diagnostic. So yeah. It's experience, guesswork, that sort of thing. When I think about the fact that you're saying, okay, there's a lot of work to be done in this area. I also think about it seems like things are moving really fast, like within the past, am I right, 20, 30 years-ish? Or do you think that it's really just ramping up, let's say, within the past decade or so?
I would say it's probably been increasing over the past 20, 30 years, but in particular, over the past decade or so, you're really seeing such a huge momentum, not only around the type of therapeutic that can be provided to the patient, but even more emphasis on the diagnosis. So you're seeing quite a bit of emphasis put around, did we even get the diagnosis correct? How can we get the diagnosis correct even better? Who is managing these patients? Who's making the diagnosis, and how can we simplify or impact what that looks like for the clinician, which then ultimately impacts the patient's journey. So yes, it is a constantly evolving space, which is super exciting. But I would say over the past decade, and even over the past, 3, 4, 5 years with CAR T now, coming into effect, and that really being such a huge player in kind of the potential for what we have to maybe even eliminate some autoimmune diseases. I think that's a really exciting space. So definitely evolved, definitely exponentially now.
Okay, so I was going to ask if what you think accounts for the new focus and the real concern about diagnostics, but I am unfamiliar with the reference you just made. So what is that, and how does that, what is it about that makes it such a player in the diagnostics field?
Yeah, it's effectively an opportunity to potentially re-engineer certain cells and change, effectively ensure, remove autoimmunity is the simplest way to say. So almost to, I don't necessarily want to say necessarily a cure, but really the opportunity to almost re-engineer and remove certain autoimmune conditions, right? And effectively cure diseases. I think that's why we've seen CAR T as such an exciting avenue within other diseases. So the idea that it could potentially also be implemented into the autoimmune space is very exciting. So
okay, thank you for that. You also mentioned that, and that as you were studying it, you got this opportunity to go to Thermo Fisher. So how did that come about? Like, when we think about the trajectory of our work, we think, oh, what a happy accident, or no, this was how I planned it, or so what was, or was neither one of those the explanation for what happened in your case?
Yeah, so it definitely not planned. Definitely not what I was expecting. I think certainly at a time in my life where I was open to looking at different pathways, and it was actually I think somebody within Thermo Fisher that I happened to meet and get acquainted with that just asked, have you ever considered moving into the industry side of things? Might be something you want to consider. So I explored a couple of things, had a couple of conversations, and thought, you know what, like this is really not a space I ever thought I would be in. I thought I would purely stay in academia for my entire career, whether that was, going through and finishing my PhD, or, potentially going to med school, or what that might look like. But, I think it came at the right time when I was definitely much more open to that. And I think worked out quite well because it really has opened my eyes to so much. And I hope I can now kind of pay that forward to other people.
So in introducing you, I made reference to the disproportionate number of women to men experiencing autoimmune diseases. What do you think explains? That's maybe not fair because it's probably a big answer, but what are ways that we can explain that fact? What do you think is happening? Is it that we're diagnosing things better? There are actually more cases, something else?
Yeah, in terms of why more women are affected, I think there are certainly many theories out there. I think, um, looking at the evidence that exists,
Mhm.
there is definitely an interplay from a hormonal standpoint. We see, changes in autoimmune susceptibility pre and post pregnancy. I think the challenges from a diagnosis standpoint are really intriguing because and this is where I think the opportunity to really educate and impact is even more exciting when women present to their primary care clinician, and if they present with a lot of the symptoms that either resemble autoimmunity or many other things, which can be fatigue, hair loss, joint pain. Oftentimes, we find in many surveys and market research indicate that it's often brushed off.
Mm.
You're tired, it's hormonal, right? So we're often told not a big deal, you're overreacting. On top of that, layer on, what we see from the research is that women tend to just deal with things sometimes, right? Like while we might go to seek care more than our male counterparts, we do tend to feel like we should just deal with things and just kind of move on. So I think a lot of these factors combined, right? Like being told by, or our symptoms not being taken into account as readily as maybe our male counterparts. So a male that might present a clinician might more aptly start ordering certain diagnostic tests versus for a female because of that tie to hormonal, the overlapping symptoms tied to other hormonal indications or other things. They might just say, you know what, you might just be going through menopause, or you're tired, or this is hormonal. So a lot of that, delayed diagnosis is really associated with that. And then you couple that also with really what I'm very passionate about, which is equity and access to care, right? So absolutely women are I think roughly 66% of women will be diagnosed or misdiagnosed over men, while the majority of patients with autoimmune conditions, I think 80+% are female. And then couple that with from a socioeconomic standpoint and a racial standpoint, then you see those inequities continue to expand exponentially. And so really the opportunity to impact care, and by doing that, impact access. And that in and of itself is impacting women's health because of how closely this is associated with women and what women, the impact women have to society.
So what I'm hearing, please correct me if I'm wrong, is, and there's a thread that I'm feeling like I can pull through some other points that you've made. So your work in population health is also part of the improvement in diagnostic techniques that are more sociological even than instrumental, so that the deciding what tests to run and making the diagnostics, the instruments, smarter, more sophisticated, whatever, or bring them online, full stop. In addition to that, it's how to address what is presented in a way that's going to end up being meaningfully tested. Does that, I'm not sure if that seems like a reasonable thing to say. I mean, it sounds like you're taking a really holistic approach to diagnostics.
Yes, correct.
Yeah.
And that's exactly, I think that's what's so exciting about the health economic piece of it, right? It's not simply create a diagnostic test, but ensure that diagnostic test has value. And does that value, are you bringing something to the market that effectively changes how care is translated to the patient? So, and not only that, I think the other layer that I often speak to is, are there diagnostics that exist now that could be used more effectively by clinicians? So while bringing any new test to the market takes time and resources, and we absolutely want to do that. Mm-hmm. In the interim, while we're here and there are diagnostics that will make an impact, can they be used more effectively? So that's a lot of, for me, what's so exciting about working for Thermo Fisher is the amount of emphasis that we put on educating clinicians, educating patients, bringing awareness to kind of the laboratory and clinical dialogue, what that looks like to ensure that, a test isn't just a test, but a test is used as effectively as possible. The identification of which test to use is made knowing, keeping the population in mind. So yeah, it really is more of a holistic picture. And for me, stepping into that population health economic realm is really what opened my eyes to that.
So if you could say one thing about science, in other words, what are the first words that come to your mind? I mean, kind of given everything that you've said before, but maybe also what you've not discussed, what's the first thing that you think of when you think science?
Curiosity, curiosity, collaboration, an advocate, right? Especially in the realm that I feel like I'm fortunate enough to be able to play in, really being able to connect dots to be an advocate for the patient and for populations at most risk. So that's what's so exciting for me.
And so one final question, if I may, given what you've just said about the environment in which you're able to practice your profession, and given the challenges in research across the sciences today, how do you view Thermo Fisher going forward? Because things are kind of precarious as we speak. That's one way to put it. What's happening at the industry level? If that's a fair question to ask and not too vague.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a very loaded question.
Mhm.
I think, like I mentioned before, the exciting piece about Thermo Fisher is it is a large and diverse company really making impact in so many different arenas.
Mhm.
And I feel like our CEO Mark Casper has done just a phenomenal job um, in making decisions that will directly drive innovation and drive patient care.
Mhm.
Now, when we distill that down to kind of the allergy, autoimmune space, the space that I kind of live, that I live in day to day, when I think about the current environment and some of the challenges, I mean, it's definitely a hot topic at medical conferences and scientific conferences, and I think we, as not only industry, but we as scientists, have such an opportunity to lead with empathy,
Mhm.
right? Oftentimes, scientists, especially, tend to be very black and white. I know that's how I was when I stepped into industry, very black and white. And what I have learned since then is to ensure that I'm looking at things with nuance and taking different perspectives into account and making sure it doesn't live in a vacuum. So, in this day and age, when we explain things, are we explaining them taking the other side into consideration? Are we, are we making sure the right people understand not only the data, but how the data has impact? And are we making that clear, right? So we have such an opportunity, I think, and to me, I think that all stems from empathy, being aware of the impact the test can have from multiple different vantage points. And I think if we can do that, I feel like we as Thermo Fisher are going to be able to impact the space, but then also we as scientists should be able to impact the arenas that we work in and the spaces that we live in day to day. And it's such a unique opportunity to have the privilege to do that. So it's an exciting time. It's definitely a challenging time, but we are change makers, right? Scientists
Yeah.
are change makers, and that's the ultimate goal: is how can we be change makers in a space where there is challenge, and how can we maybe think about things a little bit differently and help others around us think about them differently as well. So, but great question. I mean, definitely loaded, but good question.
Well, Dr. Joy, thank you so much for taking your time to chat today. I could chat with you but for hours and hear more about your work and your life. So maybe we'll have an opportunity to speak again. But in the meantime, I appreciate you, and I know that our audience does as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mia. I enjoyed time speaking with you and would love to come back anytime. I
Oh, good,
appreciate this time.
good, good. Wonderful. Please join me next time on Lab Roots, The Life of Her Mind. Until then, check out previous episodes and visit labroots.com to participate in virtual events, read trending science news, and more.